never believed in ghost stories. Never. Stories, legends, the usual creepy tales people tell around campfires or in old houses. I always thought they were nonsense, but what I experienced in that house, it changed everything. You can't unsee those kind of things. And now I have to tell somebody, because if I don't, it's going to stay with me forever. I had just moved in, and honestly, I was thrilled. A Victorian house with character, charm, plenty of space. I dreamed of this place for years. High ceilings, big heavy oak doors, intricate mouldings. It was more than I imagined. I couldn't wait to make it my own. But there was something about it, something subtle, something that just made the hairs on the back of my neck prickle. The house had been empty for years, and the silence inside it was deafening. I did the tour around the place and finished by climbing the narrow staircase to the attic. My excitement pushing the unease aside. The room was almost empty except for two lone old windows either side. Sunlight spilled through them, illuminating the dust motes. The emptiness was almost unpleasant. It was like it felt like a secret waiting to be discovered, but the shadows in the corners, they made me glance more than twice. The back garden stretched on, but it was wild and untamed, overgrown. Grass and curling ivy gave it a sense of mystery. At the far end, an old shed leaned. It was charming in a forgotten kind of way, but it also whispered of years without care. As I carried boxes through the house, unpacking room by room, I felt the thrill of possibility. This was my new home, my new start. And sometimes when I paused, I thought I could hear floors settling under some unseen weight, or the soft creak of a hallway that was supposed to be empty. It's just my imagination. It's an old house. That's what I kept telling myself. I hadn't fully unpacked everything. Not yet. Just the essentials. Pots and pans for cooking, a few plates, blankets, bedding. The rest of the boxes were still stacked, nice and neatly, promising to be dealt with another day. It wasn't exactly cozy yet, but it was home. Or at least it should have felt like it was home. That first night, lying on the mattress in what would be my bedroom, I could hear the house groan and sigh around me. Just the settling of old wood, right? The creaks of floorboards stretching under their age. It was normal. But some noises weren't so easy to explain. A soft thump from above me. A scrape down the hallway. Like something or someone was just pacing about out of sight. I tried to focus on the sound of my own breathing, the gentle hum of the night outside. But sleep just came in fitful bursts. Morning brought sunlight and a false sense of security. I decided to finally check the shed at the top end of the garden. I need a ladder for decorating and fixing the walls, and it looked like it might just have everything I needed. As I walked towards it, the garden seemed calm, almost inviting. Sure, it was overgrown, but it had so much potential. When I turned back and to walk towards the house, I froze. For a fraction of a second, I saw something, looking out of the attic window. Only for a second, just a silhouette, a shadow that vanished the moment I blinked. My heart skipped and I told myself it was just a trick of the morning light, a reflection, anything to explain it logically. I shook off the unease, took a step back and headed back into the house to grab some more tools, trying to focus on practical matters. That's when I noticed it. There's a box that had been stacked neatly yesterday was now toppled over. Its contents had spilled across the floor. It was a good way from the other boxes. I hadn't knocked it over. Definitely nothing in the house had shifted that box. It was too heavy. But my stomach sank and a bit of a chill went up my spine. I forced myself to tidy it up, convincing myself it was just a coincidence. But that thread of doubt had already been sown. Something about the house made me feel uneasy. Just something was watching. By the time evening rolled around, I was exhausted. I'd spent the entire day moving boxes, sorting out what furniture would go where, just trying to make sense of the old house, so I could start decorating. My muscles ached and my head throbbed, but I figured a cup of coffee and a sit down was all I needed. I flicked on the kitchen light and the warm glow spilled across the room. I leaned against the counter as the coffee pot brewed. For a few moments everything felt normal. I was in my new home. I had survived the moving in process. I went to sit down in the other room and just relax. I wasn't there but a couple of minutes and the lights in the kitchen began to flicker. First just brief flutter, then longer and finally more erratic flashes. The entire kitchen was bathed in uneven strobing light. My heart started to race. I went to get up and walk towards the kitchen. A loud crash cut me off. Glass shattering across the floor. My stomach just dropped. I stopped dead. The lights stopped flickering and the coffee pot lay in pieces across the floor. I stared at it, bewildered. I hadn't touched it, hadn't bumped it or anything. I wasn't even in the room. I bent down and started to clean up the pieces of glass. That's when I noticed how cold the house felt. Not the kind of cool that comes from a draft, but it was biting, unnaturally chill. It seemed to just seep inside you. I tried to shake off the feeling of the unease and just headed off to bed. My exhaustion had caught up with me, overriding any kind of fear and suspicion. I just needed sleep. I set my alarm, climbed into bed, and I was asleep almost immediately. My body just surrendering to the rest it needed. But even as I drifted off, I couldn't help but shake the feeling that the house was just not finished with me. Something was watching. It just didn't feel right. I came downstairs to the faint smell of coffee. I walked over to the sink, automatically reaching for the cup I had left next to it that night before. Only it wasn't there. It wasn't where I remembered leaving it. I swore I had left it right next to the sink, but now it was sat at the far end of the counter, as if someone had picked it up and moved it. Little things felt off. A picture frame tilted slightly, a chair nudged a few inches from its usual spot. Every small change made my stomach just tighten a little bit more. I tried to shake it off and I ended up calling my brother. hoping for some reassurance. Are you seriously calling me about a cup? He was laughing at me, and he's told me it's just the stress from moving, or maybe I was just getting old and forgetful. He told me not to worry, and he'll be around to help out to get the place sorted. Made me feel a little bit better. I hung up, but the unease just clung to me a little bit. I spent the day going through boxes, organising, moving items into the attic for storage. The house needed order, and I needed distraction. Each time I climbed the stairs to the attic, a shiver ran down my spine. The dark corners just seemed to hold their breath. I couldn't shake that feeling that something was watching. Night came, and I tried to relax with a warm bath. The water eased the tension, but the old house just felt alive around me. Then I heard it. Soft, deliberate footsteps just on the other side of the bathroom door. I called out. My voice was tighter than I intended. I was hesitant, but I stepped out, and the hallway was empty. There was nothing there. I shook my head, telling myself it was just nerves. Made my way to bed and tried to sleep, but the house had other plans. I could hear things just moving in other rooms. Objects knocked over. Whispers of sound that just didn't belong. Each noise seemed to stretch longer than it should, testing me. My pulse raced, and every shadow just seemed alive and creeping closer. I lay there listening, heart hammering. Dawn finally pushed through the windows. Daybreak never felt so desperately needed, but even as the sun rose, the memories of the night's sounds just stayed with me. Whatever was in this house was patient. It felt like it had begun to learn what I was afraid of. I avoided the house for the day and tried to tame some of the garden, stacking firewood, clearing weeds, and moving old pots into the shed at the end. My muscles ached and sweat was dripping, but my mind never stopped scanning the house. Every time I glanced up at that attic window, I expected, or even hoped, to see something, anything, just to confirm that my imagination wasn't running wild and there really was something there. But it was always just a lonely old window staring back, empty and silent. As evening fell, shadows just stretched across the garden, and the house seemed to loom darker than it did before. I tried to shake off that feeling, telling myself the attic was empty. They're just noises. It's an old house. It's a strange place. I'd get used to it. Tried to tell myself it was just the stress of moving and fatigue. Night came and I tried to unwind with a quick dinner. I feel the house just groaning and shifting around me. But I felt that same weight of unseen eyes just pressing against me. I ignored it, just convincing myself I was paranoid. By the time I climbed the stairs to bed, I'd never felt so tired. I pulled the covers over myself trying to escape sleep, but it wasn't long before the sound started again. First a creak from above me, then a faint scraping of something moving across the attic floor. I tried to almost hold my breath just to listen. Every small sound, scuff of a shoe, whisper of movement. Everything felt amplified, and I heard it, a sharp scratch across the wooden floorboards above me, followed by a low thump, as though something had jumped or fallen. Panic rose, and I was rooted to that mattress. I realised with a sinking feeling that the attic had become more than just a space. There was a presence there. Something was living in the dark corners of that empty room, and it had become very aware of me. The hours passed. It was impossible to tell really how long. I'd lost complete track of time. Every small noise made me flinch. Objects in my room just seemed to shift slightly, as though nudged by an invisible hand. And then, just as sleep threatened to claim me, a shadow moved past the door. It was quick and deliberate, impossible to really identify, but my heart pounded and every muscle screamed at me to run, but I was trapped in that bed, staring at the dark, waiting. Just felt like whatever was there was just feeding on my fear. The night dragged on, and I tried to count every second until dawn came, and when light finally seeped through the curtains, the oppressive presence didn't vanish entirely. It receded, sure, but I knew it was just biding its time. The morning light offered little comfort. Even with sun streaming through the windows, the house just felt colder, heavier, as if the weight of something unspoken. I tried to busy myself, unpacked more boxes, tried to sort through a few items, stacking what I could. But every creak, every whisper of the old wood just made me flinch. By late evening, I decided to retreat for the kitchen for some tea. As I turned on the kettle, the familiar flicker of the lights made my stomach twist. And a soft thud echoed from the attic. My hands froze around a mug. I told myself it was nothing, just gravity, old boards, maybe one of the boxes fell over. Deep down, I knew better. I spent what was left just moving between rooms, just with a growing sense of dread each time I went upstairs. I just felt like eyes were on me from the shadows, something watching me from the corners. Boxes I'd stacked earlier were slightly moved, dust disturbed as though someone or something had passed through. I kept reminding myself there was no one there. There shouldn't be, and yet the evidence told a different story. By the time night fell, and I went through the same ritual. Sleep was supposed to be sanctuary, but as soon as I closed my eyes, I felt uneasy, as though the house was preparing itself, just pressing in. Stretches along the walls and faint shuffling from the attic. Whispers just too low to understand. Everything was just beyond the edges of perception. Then it becomes very clear. Footsteps, deliberate, pacing slowly above me. I wanted to call out, to demand to show itself, but fear had paralyzed me. The steps stopped, and I held my breath, straining to hear what would come next. A box in the hallway toppled over, just smashed to the floor, and something went skittering into the shadows. I sat up bolt upright. In that moment, I realised this was no longer just a passive presence anymore. It was aware of me. It was following my movements, anticipating steps, and scaring me on purpose. I knew I couldn't just stay in one place, so I moved through the rooms, hands trembling, every instinct screaming that I was being watched. Though I couldn't see anything clearly, and then, as if testing me the shadow flicked past the doorway again. It was quick and fluid and very fast, but it left a chill that I just felt down to my bones. A certainty that was whatever was in this house was bolder and it was getting closer. Sleep didn't come that night. I stayed awake, noting every shift, every whisper, every movement. When dawn finally arrived, I was exhausted in ways beyond physical. I knew deep down that this wasn't done and I didn't know what to do. I spent the day in the garden again, just anything to avoid the house. By the time I'd finished hacking away, my hands were raw and my back ached. I decided to call my brother just to have a bit of conversation, maybe get him to come and help. But when I checked my phone, there was no signal. I thought I'll go back outside and try from there. Only to find the handle of the door wouldn't turn. It was jammed, it was locked. I went to the kitchen and tried the back door, same thing. Solid, wouldn't budge. Even the latch wouldn't move. I started to panic. I went from room to room, checking each window. Every one of them was stiff, it wouldn't move, as though the frames had fused shut. That's when I heard it, something shifting upstairs. Just that familiar dull scrape followed by a sharp crash. I turned in time just to see a cardboard box come tumbling down the stairs. It had been stored neat towards the top. There was no reason for it to move on its own. My heart began to pound again. I ran back to the front door trying to yank it open, but it just wouldn't budge. The lights started flickering again. The hallway plunged into shadow for a split second before buzzing back to life. I caught a reflection and turned to see. Halfway up the stairs, framed in the dim light, she was just standing there as clear as day. Floor-length dress, dark and stiff with age. Her posture was just dead straight. Hair pulled back tightly, seemed to stretch her pale face. Shadowed, hollow eyes, just locked dead on me. She looked like she had stepped straight out of a Victorian photograph. There she was, stood, not moving, not blinking. I tell you, I screamed in a way I've never screamed before. Right then the door smashed open. My brother just stood in the doorway, eyes wide with confusion. He had no idea what was going on. I didn't wait to explain. I bolted through that door, just brushed past him. I didn't dare look back. I didn't want to see what was in there still. I was done with that place. My brother stayed with me in his place, and every time I thought about going back to collect my things, my chest tightened. By the time we did return, it was together and in the broad daylight. The house looked ordinary again. Doors opened easily, windows slid up without resistance. There was no sign of the box that had fallen down the stairs, or definitely no trace of the woman. My brother teased me, said maybe I'd imagined it, but his eyes betrayed something else. He'd felt it too when we crossed the threshold, that strange heaviness in the air. I didn't care what it was, I just wanted out. I contacted the estate agent the same afternoon and told him I wanted the house sold. No price negotiation, no drawn out process. I wanted someone else's name on the papers as soon as possible. I passed by maybe a month later, stood on the pavement across the street. I was watching as the new owners moved in. They were laughing, carrying boxes inside. The attic window stared back at me, empty and still. For a moment I convinced myself it had just been stress, exhaustion, nothing more. Then as I turned to leave, the movement caught my eye. Just a pale face framed by tightly pulled hair peering back from beyond the glass. I just walked away and never looked back.